Alright guys, I am going to show you my next step, and that is to paint the jigs. So I have a batch here of my 7/16 jigs that I poured yesterday with a 4/0 hook, using the Do It mold round jig head. This is a 60-degree 4/0 mustad hook that I poured yesterday. So what I have here is kind of a lot going on here. Is I got these, it's a fluid bed, and it's a fluid bed station that I built. And what it is, it's starting off with this aquarium 4-port air pump, okay? And it feeds these 4 stations that I built, and each one of these stations has its own cock valve so I can regulate the air. Now this pump also has a regulator here, but as you'll see, some of the powder paint that I'm using, depending upon the color, some of them needs more air than others. Now, there's plenty of YouTube videos on how these are done, so I did this one myself. What these are 2-inch PVC tubing, and the way this works here, this is an empty one. The way this works is there is a coupler, a male-to-male coupler here, and that's just a paper bag right inside there, and it acts as a filter. Okay, so as I was saying, this is a 2-inch coupler with a 2-inch PVC. This happens to be 3 inches tall. This is what carries my powder paint. I would pour that in here. The bottom chamber, again, is a 2-inch PVC that's glued down. Probably show you better here. It's glued down to this board that I have that I can hang on the wall. And when the air is turned on, the air is introduced into this chamber here, and what it does is it fills this chamber up with air, and it provides enough pressure to allow the air to come up through this paper bag. Now, some people use filters, some people use stock printer paper. This is a lunch baggie paper that I stole from someone's idea on YouTube, and it works pretty good. So when the powder paint is in there, what it does, and the air is introduced into the chamber, it fluffs up the pressure fluffs up that powder paint so that it looks like fluid, and that's why I call it a fluid bed. Now, what a lot of guys choose to do is they get their powder paint, and the way it works is you heat up your lead or your jig, whatever you want to paint, either with a torch or a heat gun. I choose to use a heat gun. It works pretty good. If you're using a torch at open flame, 3-4 seconds at the most, depending upon how much lead you're heating up, and then you dip that lead into the paint, swirl it in real quick, and take it out, and it's finished. If you're using a heat gun like this, this is, I think, 1500 watt heat gun. It's a little bit longer, 10 to 15 seconds. I think 13 seconds is a sweet spot for this 7/16 amount of lead here. You heat that up and you dip it into the paint. Now, like I was saying, a lot of guys, what they do is they go ahead and just dip it into the canister full of paint. This is black. What happens is the paint packs down like sand. In fact, it's pretty packed down in there. And what people do is they just kind of swirl it around, get it all loose so that it's very loose and fluffy in there. Once it's loose like that, then you're able to take your jig, dip it in there, swirl it, and it covers pretty good. So the problem with it being packed, if you try to go ahead and dip your lure into a packed paint, it becomes a gooey mess, and it doesn't get the type of paint coverage that you want. So what this does is when you pour the paint into these chambers here that are filled with air, it automatically regulates the paint very well. So I have 4 different stations. I have here I have a black blue flake, a root beer color, purple smoke, and this one here is empty. So let me just show you how this works. And once I get this going, I'll go ahead and do a couple so I can show you the end result and what I do to prepare these jigs for paint. So the first thing I do is fill this up with powder paint. Okay, and I know you probably can't see that very well, but in there there's some powder paint I get from these jugs and stick them in here. Excuse me. So I go ahead and turn on my pump, turn on my valve to the chamber. Gotta be careful with that because it'll just pop up. I don't know if you saw that, but it just popped up. And what it does is, I'm going to zoom in here in a second, but you want to get enough air in there so that it actually looks like fluid. Let me show you what that looks like. And as you can see, and as I increase the air, it looks like it's like fluid, and that allows your jig, when it's introduced into that paint, to get a much better coverage. Okay, so that is how that looks. All right, so now that I have this set up the way I want it, it looks good. Let me show you how I prepare my jigs. Now, the jigs themselves, in my last video I showed you that the weed guard, I put in it's these, if I can find one here, it's these weed guard stubs that go into the mold, and it allows you to have a hole into your jig so that paint does not get introduced in there, because then you're not going to be able to fit your weed guard into the jig if there's paint in there. These weed guards are 1/8 of an inch, and they go into these holes, they glue in, so that's how that works. So what I do is I add these Teflon sticks, stick them in there. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is the eye of the hook. You don't want to get paint in there. That eye of the hook, once it's covered with paint, it's very difficult to clean out. And if you use some kind of tool to clean it out, you introduce burrs, and that's a weak spot for your line. So what I have here is I have this heat shrink tubing. I got it in bulk. You can get it on Amazon. So this works pretty good. I just go ahead and put it on the end of my eye hook, heat it up for a few seconds so that it shrinks on the end of the eye. Go ahead and cut off the excess. And that's what you're left. Okay, it's covering the eye so that when you go to paint, it's not going to be a mess. All right. So now I have the eye covered, I have my weed guard covered, and it's ready to be painted. Now I'm going to heat this lead up with the heat gun for about 13 seconds, and then I'm going to dip it into my fluid bed that looks maybe a little more air. All right, about 13 seconds. Turn it around so you get even amount of heat. Like that. You don't need a whole lot. And then once you put it in here, you just kind of stick it in, swirl it around, knock off the excess, and there is your finished, well, almost finished jig. Okay, that's a black and blue. And while it's still warm, I pop off that heat shrink, and you can see how nice, I hope the camera's getting that. The hook eye is nice and clean, and this is ready to be put in my drying rack. I'll wait a few seconds before I pull off this Teflon stub. I just wait a little bit. I'll do 5 at a time. So let me do a root beer now. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn this chamber on slowly. You can see it kind of smoked up, popped up. It's best to probably put the lid on and introduce the air slowly. Now, this particular color is root beer, and it doesn't need as much air. So I keep this regulated here, but I can use these cock valves here to regulate how much air each individual station has. Okay. I'm not sure if you can catch that, but just slowly dialing it in, open and close to get the amount of air I need in there. Just to see, there we go, that looks pretty good. All right, this one already has the shrink tubing on the hook eye. I'm going to go ahead and put the Teflon tube into the weed guard, and this one is ready to be dipped. Want to make sure you turn it around, go ahead and stick it in there, swirl it, knock off the excess while it's still warm. Go ahead and pull out the shrink tube. And there you go, this one is root beer. Okay, very clean finish. Put that on my drying rack. And here's the black with blue flake. I go ahead and take off this Teflon stub here. And the nice thing about these Teflon stubs, because they're made out of Teflon, they're heat resistant, and you can just take, you can just scrape off the paint. The paint comes right off. I'm not going to do it here because I don't have something to cover. I don't want to make a mess here. But they come off very easily. And then there is your finished jig, like I showed you before. I'll go ahead and do 40 to 50 of these. Right here I have 40 7/16. Once these are all ready and painted, I'm going to do black and blue. I have root beer, I have purple smoke, and I'm also going to do watermelon. Once those are all done, then you introduce them into an oven. Some people say 20 minutes, 15 minutes. 350 for anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes at the most in an oven. And what that does is it allows the powder paint to bond much stronger to the lead, and it gives it a much harder finish. Now I also paint using vinyl and epoxy on some of my other lures, and that's a different process altogether. When I paint with an epoxy, I certainly can introduce my weed guard into my mold and have the weed guard with the hook all in one into the mold, and that looks like this one here. Here's one that I molded with the weed guard and the lead all together, because this is not going to be introduced into an oven because I'm painting this with vinyl, which with vinyl you just dip into the paint or paint it on with a brush, and then you can finish it with an epoxy for a hardened finish. So let me just show you what a completed jig looks like using the vinyl paint. Now this here, I believe this is a pumpkin with a root beer skirt. Actually, it looks more like watermelon, might be watermelon. So this is vinyl. I don't know if the camera's catching that. So there's vinyl, and the way I finish this is after I paint it with the vinyl paint, I go ahead and cover it with an epoxy finish, and I take the epoxy, I mix it, and I introduce a little bit of glitter. So this is the glitter. I put maybe an eighth of a teaspoon of this glitter in the mix of my epoxy, mix it up really well, and then I finish my jig, my vinyl painted jigs, using this. It gives it a nice flake, looks really pretty. So you can use different colors for that. And then that's it, that completes this jig. Now the problem with the vinyl is it takes a couple days. Once you paint it with the vinyl, I usually let it cure for a couple days inside the house, and then once it's been cured for a couple days, I then paint it with the vinyl, and then once the vinyl is cured, I wait another 2 days before I can put the skirts on and store it. So this is the two-part epoxy. Oh, let me get this so that you can see the labels. Component systems, epoxy, these are small bottles, a part A and a part B, you mix them together. What I like to do is I'll use a syringe so I know I'm getting the right amount of part A and part B. I'll just go ahead and take 5 units at a time of part A, put it into a small jug, either a ceramic jug or a glass jug, and I'll take 5 units of part B, mix that in there, mix it up really well, introduce a little bit of the glitter that I showed you, mix that up, go ahead and dip my lure in there, then put it on my drying rack. But every once in a while you're going to have to stir that because the metal flake that you introduce into the epoxy settles to the bottom pretty quickly. So you have to, every once in a while, stir that up. Now, with the powder paints have a glitter already in them. And I mean, some people say these are harder. I think they're about the same. If you beat these up with rocks, you're going to chip. Same thing with the vinyl. So that is my process here. There's plenty of YouTube videos on how to build these what do you call it? These stations here, these fluid beds. I chose to do this on a board. Everything's mounted down together, and I have my tubing all secured here, so I can take this and hang it, get it out of the way. So just wanted to share that with you guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, folks. Well, that was my first video on making a jig using the do-it molds. There's one thing I did want to mention. I took out the Teflon base pin after I painted it, and you want to be sure to keep that base pin, that Teflon base pin, in those weed guard holes when you introduce it into the oven and bake it for the final curing process. I found out the hard way that you know, I took those base pins out. I put about 20 of my jigs in the oven, 350 for about 20 minutes to cure. And what had happened was the paint got soft enough where it crept into that weed guard hole, and that 1/8 of an inch hole was no longer 1/8 of an inch, and my weed guards would not go in. So I had a heck of a time cleaning those out. I resorted to a drill with a 1/8 drill bit and kind of drilled out some of that paint because the paint got really hard, particularly after it was cured in the oven. So you can take them out, but just be sure to put those Teflon base pins back in the weed guard hole when you put them in the oven. That way you won't have the problem that I had. So listen, guys, I appreciate you watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.